We are rolling. Uh, Chat number 7 on these trauma talks with Inka and Daniel. How are you guys?
Great. Thank you, Sergio. Excited to do number 7 with you.
Yeah, me too. Me too. Um, so just like always, it's being recorded. And, I see Geraldo just joined. Good to have you. If you don't want to chat, if you just want to listen, we're more than welcome to have you. And just we're gonna get this ball rolling. We usually talk about a lot of topics. We've covered a lot of things, I feel, in this past 6 weeks, 7 weeks, and we try to go on what the basics, what I think it's important, what we think it's important for people to talk about. Um, and I felt like there's something that's pretty interesting to me that I would love to get your perspective. What you guys do, a lot of the trauma therapies, a lot of the power therapies that exist out there right now are using the abilities that we as humans already have, right? Which is connecting to our bodies, connecting to our emotions, sometimes connecting to our thoughts. But we have MAPS. MAPS has been doing a lot of work with psychoactive drugs to induce these. I don't know what I would call them altered states, to allow people to tap into these experiences of trauma, primarily PTSD, to heal these things, to heal these events that happen to them. I know they're on their third clinical phase 3 trials right now, and they've had high success rate for with what they're doing. I think they're using MDMA right now to help people get to these states of feeling safety and maybe love and healing. I know this differs a lot from what you guys do. I know, Inka, you might have different thoughts because breath work, specifically holotropic breath work, was created by who was it? It was Stanislav Grof. After some of the drugs they were using were not able to be used in MAPS anymore. So, I would love to hear your thoughts on, what you think about this methodology, how it differs from what you guys do. And yeah, I would love to just nitpick at what you guys think about this stage that we're hitting in a way right now.
I say I always say what we are doing is no drugs, no medication, and no invasive procedures. And that's one of the reasons why I like it. It's something people can, after they learn it, can do on themselves. They don't need to go to any doctor. They don't need to go to any hospital, and they don't need to go to any pharmacy to get some medication. And as long as the body gives us abilities to work with our problems, with our traumas on our own, that's my personal preference. I'm not completely familiar with what MAPS does. I've seen the website that they have phase 3, and for some people that might be very nice. It's easy, yeah? You just take medication and then something happens. So it's perhaps for some people the way to go. From my point of view, I find it very empowering to know that I don't need anything third party, but that I bring everything to the table that I need to heal myself. How about you, Inka?
Yeah, basically, I agree with you. It's what should I say? Like, honestly, I haven't really looked much into drug-assisted therapy types, because I think the people who come to me, they're usually able to handle what we need to heal on their own. So that's really not my specialty, to look into these sort of things.
Mm.
I can't really tell you much more than that.
Okay, that's fair. I think that's
I can add that if that's in a controlled study and the substances are controlled and clean, this might be something interesting to look into. Not personally for me, but just as a thing for somebody who's more looking into a quick and passive fix for their problems. Just everything else, which is not controlled and where you don't know that because there is a dosage and so on. I'm very, very hesitant for these kinds of things because I've seen psychosis deriving from that, and so I'm very reluctant to think. And so I'm very happy that our techniques don't need any invasive any drugs or medications. So we get rid of one more possibility for failure. There's enough problems already. We don't need to.
Right. It's still a very not misunderstood, but just not completely understood variable. And I think that's one thing that there's not enough conversation about, this idea that drugs can also alter the psyche. I mean, there's enough stories of people uncovering or developing mental, disorders from taking some sort of drug, or going to do ayahuasca or LSD. I mean, I think everybody knows, or I definitely know some stories of people. I got issues from it myself. A lot of dissociation from it, and a lot of things. So that's why I don't. I have my reservations. But one thing that I do think about is, Inka, I think you mentioned it, this idea that some people may not be ready or may not be able to do the work with the techniques that are not chemically induced, from an external source such as MDMA. There's a great trauma therapist on YouTube. I think her name is Irene Lyon. And she talks about this idea that, some people just need to do a lot of this foundational work to kind of feel like they're grounded, they're in their body, and then they can do this. They can do a lot of this work. Do you guys feel like that's something that you stumble upon a lot, that people don't have, they go into this work, they're ready to work with you guys, but maybe they get overwhelmed quick, or they have something they need to work on first to be able to do this work? Or do you feel like the techniques you have are relatively simple, or relatively not simple, because they weren't simple to acquire, but they're relatively straightforward? Or do you think there's a lot that needs to be learned as well? And to either of you guys.
Okay, so let me start. That was actually quite a mouthful. quite a lot of things.
You're right. You're absolutely right. I'm sorry.
I would say that one of the ways that you recognize a good therapist is that he's able to hand you that fairly simple instructions to accomplish some really deep work. Yeah, and it's a bit like the Columbus egg. Yeah, it's very simple that it looks like, but you have to have the idea how to do it first. And with the work that I'm doing, it relates to the primary cell, and I just don't think that mixes very well with drugs where you don't know where exactly the primary cell plant actually sets things in motion. We for example, we know that there is such a thing as trauma bypasses that might feel like you have healed something, but you don't really get the metabolic benefit from it. You just like, okay, the pain's gone. So it's more of an anesthetic. What's the English word for it? Anesthesia, than actually to healing or removing the cause. Yeah.
And you're saying that happens outside of the work you guys do, or is that a common thing?
That is stuff that we have seen happen when people come to us, and sometimes if they've messed themselves up with other methods. Yeah?
Okay. How does that tend to happen?
Oh, I mean, I don't want to name any names here, but we have seen that if you don't do the kind of therapy that allows you to feel things, but rather where you want to skip stuff, that's where you create trauma bypasses easily.
Okay.
And I can add, I myself had lots of them before I did this kind of work, and I don't know how I created them, but they were a way of dealing with my problems on my way, on my own inventions, and how I tried to think about a problem, how I tried to solve it for myself before I knew any power techniques to actually heal it. And it was a pain to get rid of them. And there are other techniques that usually when there's a technique, I think Grant writes it in one of his books, when you within like 10 seconds, you say, oh, the pain is gone, then you did not heal the trauma. So the big guru that tells you get rid of the thing within 10 seconds very probably creates bypasses, okay? And not really heals the trauma. It takes a little bit of time to heal the trauma completely. And that's for example, one indication. If it's too quick, but it's not like precise, but it's an indication. Regarding the tools and the questions, so our techniques are pretty straightforward. Okay, they're not difficult to learn, and we always start with the most simple technique, and then if necessary go to a little bit more complex and a little bit more complexity and so on. So to just have an easy start. So many people can start, and for example, in comparison to other techniques, we not only work with emotions, but we work with other sensations that we can have. So it's not necessarily necessary that a person can feel the emotion, but there might be a tingling in the left knee. We can work with kinesthetic sensations as well, which is helpful. So there's a broader range, because there's some people who can feel because they were so afraid of feeling, or they were told not to feel as a kid, especially for us men, that sometimes happens. And so with these techniques, there's a huge variety. There's one very common problem in our Western society, that we tend to use and overuse our minds, our heads. And so people come and say, do I make it right? Do I make it correct? Do I make a mistake? And so the mind is always trying to understand what we're doing there. And obviously it can't, because it doesn't have any knowledge, past knowledge about what we're doing. And so it's like if it's curious, that's positive, yeah, but it's usually some skeptical and perhaps even a little bit too skeptical and resisting the situation. So usually if you overthink, and if you're an overthinker, then that's the thing where a good therapist will recognize that and will guide you through that overthinking, and will guide your mind to be a little bit more calmer so you can do the work. And as soon as there's 2, 3, 4 times an intervention which worked, then the mind will calm down, especially when we've done the silent mind process, so that working with the techniques gets even much smoother.
So this silent mind process, talking about the triune brains, does this shut down the mind a little bit? Does it make it play better with the other kind of brains that we have? Talking about them, at least talking about the ones that are most talked about, which are the neocortex, mammalian brain, and reptilian brain. Does it make it so they're kind of more in sync with one another as well? Any thoughts on that?
So I was waiting for Inka there. So yes and no. So very officially, the inner peace process brings the mind brain and the heart brain closer together, and that gives you the inner peace. It's one of the processes which we recommend doing after the silent mind, because that gives you a beautiful feeling of peace. You deactivate your past traumas, more or less, you don't feel them. They're still there, but you don't feel them in the present moment. And life changes after that. For the silent mind, not to go into too much detail, but it basically cleans up a developmental event, and therefore there's less resistance, there's less mind chatter, and the mind chatter is usually something what people hear, think, and then make their reality and create resistance for the healing, okay? Because there's always something going on, and perhaps there's also something, you shouldn't do that, or you shouldn't do this or that, or there's thoughts which go against change, and because change is perceived as something dangerous, but these techniques change something. So when the silent mind has been done, the resistance to change has less. It's much lesser than it was before. Inga, would you like to add something there?
Yeah, the resistance to change, that's unconscious in most cases. Yeah, that's the thing. But your conscious belief and your conscious effort go into let's get things better, let's move things forward, and unconsciously you have all these beliefs that may be inherited, but you get stuck with them. Yeah, you're not aware of them, but they in some way kind of like hinder you from going towards the necessary change to improve.
Right. So kind of these.
All a bit confusing because it's really about the map that has already been explored, and we just see at times and again that people have even a problem to heal straightforward things because of this mechanism interfering with them actually going through changes. And some therapies do nothing else than just work with these resistances, and they never get to the juice of things, yeah, to the real stuff.
Gotcha. It seems like most, if not everybody, has these resistances, though, right? I mean, if we talk about maybe, I don't want to get too like academic, but the idea of IFS is that these resistances are like protectors. They're there to not help you feel, because we as a species are very good at not dealing with our issues or just casting them aside, moving forward, adapting in a way to almost survive if we can't deal with it at the moment. And it's kind of like a double-edged sword. So they, in a way, are good. I mean, I wouldn't say they're good, but they're important, right? We all kind of have these things that kind of keep us moving forward. And it's only when something really big happens that we're like, okay, we need to work on, we need to self-improve. We need to work on our personal growth. We feel stuck, or we feel very anxious about our future, or we are worried about something that we might not be able to accomplish because we're in our own way. So to a certain degree, do you guys think that these resistances are important to our species?
They're important as in they're a big problem. Call them protectors, I would call them inhibitors.
Inhibitors. Okay. That's fair.
So blunt.
No, that's... but do you disagree that they might not have had an important role at some point?
I don't think so either. They're inhibitors. They're stopping growth of the individual, and they're stopping growth of the group. And usually the person who's for some reason bypassed these inhibitors made a discovery, created the iPhone, or created specific beautiful art, or created something which was disruptive to actually change society. And then when that comes out, you very quickly see that most of the people are against this change, until this change slowly creeps into life. And then there's a critical mass, and when that critical mass is reached, then basically they're there's enough persuasive energy for the change. And if we wouldn't have that, our society would look completely different. Possibly we would already flying on flying magic carpets or something like this. But it stops our development very strongly, from my point of view. And it's one thing which also I think inhibits compassion towards the other one. Okay, because there's through these inhibitors, through these resistances, we're always looking at the other one, not in a way of supporting, but in a way of, this could be my enemy, so I have to make sure that he or she doesn't get more than I do. And this is not a really friendly way to live, but that's basically how humanity has lived for decades or centuries. Inka, what do you say there?
I basically agree with you. Yeah. Maybe the image of magic carpet brings things a bit into the unreal realm, but definitely we don't know what humanity is capable of once we take the break off, actually.
Gotcha.
I think we have enormous potential for positive to develop in a much more positive way than what we currently see in most humans.
So you think that earlier generations of humans, and I'm just talking about even just 2,000 years ago, do you think they're actually more filled with these kind of painful traumatic experiences that affected their empathy, and so that's kind of why we saw these civilizations that were less empathic, less prone to equality and social growth?
Yeah, for example. It's a bit of an academic discussion at what point that mechanism kicked in that held us back. But for example, when you look at the medieval times where society was so much split into small groups and everybody had only the rules of their own group, and switching from one group to another was even a problem. Yeah, you had to follow in your father's footsteps in terms of a profession.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah? There was like really narrow rules, and so we've worked ourselves a bit out of that at least, but it was certainly slow and hard going if you look at the historical processes that were necessary for that.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's really interesting. I mean, I feel like this might be a bit off topic, but I feel like that's a theme that comes up a lot still. This idea of doing something different than your family, or these expectations that your family has of you. I feel like quite a lot of what we see in film and TV is this idea of just trauma playing out in these different scenarios, right? From something like Criminal Minds to something like, the person like High School Musical, for example. I know that's a very silly topic. I don't know. Do you guys know what High School Musical is?
Yeah, I've seen it once or twice. I have kids.
Gotcha.
Specific movie, yeah, okay.
Yeah, it's just this kid who plays basketball, and his dad, or how does it go? I forgot. Basically, he just wants. I haven't seen it, but it's like this kid who's trying to do something else than what his father wants him to do, and I feel like it plays into. I mean, it's a really interesting topic. Thinking that it makes sense. I mean, what I feel like one of the many things that being emotionally kind of stifled or with unprocessed feelings, and this goes from grief. I mean, just grief alone is a good example. When if somebody passed away, if you're, if you didn't do well in something, you are almost unable to pay attention to somebody else's feelings and to what's going on around you. You're in your own world. So, I mean, yeah, I think it's a bit academic, but I think it's really interesting and it makes sense. What I don't understand is why I feel like a lot of these ideas and these techniques are pretty new still. I mean, we're talking 30 years, 40 years, and we're just starting to talk about this idea of traumatology as a science, as a, theoretical and practical. Um, so why do you think humanity has still evolved and has become more social and more progressive and more empathic in a lot of pockets that are growing? So, if we're just developing these techniques, why do you guys think that's still happening? Uh, Still, I mean, to a relatively fast degree.
Well, I think that there was a pressure, evolutionary pressure. That's why humanity had to evolve, because there were some wars or some disasters happening, and then people had to work together. They had to overcome the emotional boundaries because there was something bigger at stake, which is survival. So when survival is at stake, then you basically overcome these small group things and so on, and you join together, and then there's a knowledge process, and then it worked, and then you basically say, okay, so this works, and then we try this one, and this works, and that's evolutionary growth, and now we have, for 20 years, we have now techniques where you can start working on your emotions, and where you can make yourself more open to new ideas, more open to suggestions, and become also more creative, because like the voice in the head, oh, am I good enough, is going to vanish, or the voice in the head, oh, nobody's going to buy it, or all these doubts basically are based on an emotional react on emotional trauma. So if you heal that trauma underneath, these thoughts go away, and then the inhibitor of you being creative goes away, and that's what I hope we will be seeing in the future, much step by step, more and more, that we have a change in our society structure and our way of how we deal with each other, into something which we described in the earlier podcast, which is something more social, more empathic, and with compassion.
That's beautiful. Yeah, that's beautiful, and that's in a world where we still live with so many wars, so many of the chaos still happens because of these differences, these perceived differences between peoples. From racism to these social injustices. That sounds wonderful. And I know that sometimes people say that when you're in your field, when you are in the thing you do, that you see that as the solution for everything, right? So the people who are engineers, they think that engineers what's going to fix the world for everyone, and medicine, it's going to fix the world for everyone, and math is going to fix it. Everybody, I feel like there's this idea that what you're doing is what's going to fix it. But I maybe I'm falling prey to it as I say this, but I really do think that a lot of the underneath social, I wouldn't even know what to call it, but this utopia that, this idea that we can be the best as a humanity, the spectrum of individuality to all the way to altruism and to compassion as our actual strengths, are derived from this very, very deep, these very deep traumas that we hold as a society and individually, that stop us from being who we can be and what we can do for each other. So I mean, I definitely agree with that. I think what's interesting is that we're finally starting to see, there's always been these cases of, and this is something that's I'm sure it's very close to your heart. We're seeing more trauma therapies, but there's always been that talk, that anecdotal talk of our emotions are tied to our physical well-being as well, to physical illnesses to I have a friend, for example, who's a doctor, and this idea of psychosomatic diseases is something that he talks a lot about. What is it? It's a bowel disorder. B. I'm drawing a blank on the name, but
Irritable bowel
yeah. IBS. I was trying to think of it, and he's very. We have a lot of discussions, and we just differ. We differ on this idea that trauma is important or it's a thing, and like the importance of it and what it does to our bodies, to our psyches, to our emotions, to our behaviors. But that's one thing that he mentioned. He's like, a lot of people show up and there's physically nothing wrong with them. There's actually nothing physically wrong with them. But this is one of those big major psychosomatic disorders that's kind of right there on the mainstream. That's in front of people's faces. That's showing, not completely, but it's showing a bit of what emotions play, what role they play in our physical bodies.
Oh yeah, definitely. I mean, I would completely agree. In psychosomatic medicine, we know that back pain, around about 70%, has to do with an emotional disbalance, aka trauma, and it's not always easy to find it. It's not always easy to treat it because it's a new idea. Even though we know about psychosomatic, the idea that I myself might be the cause for my year-long suffering with an autoimmune disease or something, that's a big pill to swallow for most of these patients. I mean, that's and because there's always this concept of blame, and there's not this concept of, oh, you lived like 20 years with that disease and now you found the way to heal it because you actually have somebody who tells you how to heal trauma, and then hopefully your IBS will get better, or whatever other psychosomatic disease. Of course, those patients might start thinking, oh, why didn't I find this like 19 years ago?
Mm-hmm.
But it wasn't there 19 years ago. And this acceptance process that what is okay and does not need to change, and whatever happened, and the only way we can change our future is to act right now. That's a concept which is not completely in our society right now, but we still think about future. Yesterday was better, or the early days were better, or without the pandemic it was better, and so we're always in a very low vibrational state about the past. We are in resistance to our past, or many people are, and then introducing these concepts of well, there might be a reason within you that caused the disease and the suffering is difficult. But from my point of view, if I would have that, I would still try to get rid of it and try to use everything instead of continue 1 or 2 or even 10 years more down the road with the same condition.
Yeah, that's interesting. I think it's before I say anything, Inka, is there anything you want to say about that? I know I talked for a while.
Well, I think that it's a pretty big field, and actually Daniel and I were talking about psychosomatic disorder the other day. We felt that, and I hope I'm correct in including you there, Daniel, that if you look at trauma, it usually has several components. There's a thought accompanied by an emotion, accompanied by sensations, body sensations. And we had this idea or this theory that psychosomatic disorders could be not stuck emotions, like people experience them with depression or other so-called psychological problems, but simply the physical component of the trauma that's just stuck. So that was one thought that we were having and could be exploring.
That's really interesting. It makes me think of, I don't know if it's Wilhelm Reich, or I forgot his name. There's what's the term? I think it's like body armor, musculature armor that we. I don't know if it's related to resistances. I might have to go back and look. But that we hold trauma sometimes as these protectors towards trauma, as like this tightness, this almost unconscious armoring against feeling bad or against things coming in that might make us feel the same way, through our bodies. And it makes me think of like back issues. I feel like, for example, I actually have back issues, and I've noticed that sometimes my lower back is tense for no reason. I could be just sitting down, and it's one of those things where like you're not aware of it until you're aware of it. You might not have known that you were like clutching your hand very tightly when you were driving, and you barely missed an accident. As your body disengages from that almost very dangerous reaction where you got in a car accident, your body starts realizing like, oh, my hands are still really tight. And I've noticed that's something that happens with me a lot. And I mean, I don't know why. I have no idea why I have lower back tenseness, but I do know that I have, after a lot of years, I have back issues. So it makes sense to me from that, just muscle issues. And it sounds really interesting to think about it as that. It makes sense. Do you think it also has to do with the amount of time that it has passed? So you hold trauma, and then eventually for a long time, your body's like, okay, I've been holding this trauma in my body, in the body for a long time. Something's got to give. A disease, an injury, an illness kind of shows up more prominently rather than just kind of pain or something.
Well, yeah, if you look at trauma causing normally constrictions in the body, and that means your blood flow is physically really reduced, your body is not meant for reduced blood flow, so you definitely will develop some real issues there.
Yeah, that makes
trauma
sense.
basically activates the sympathetic nervous system, which is great if you're running from a lion or if you have to escape a fire or whatever. And for that, our bodies are designed to do that for a short period of time, when there is a recuperation period afterwards. Okay, so you have to relax and then let the body do all the internal healing it has to do with all these micro lesions and so on. And usually you get some muscle ache and whatever when you're not trained, and that's well. And then 2 or 3 days later, you're good to go, and then you can escape from a lion again. But in our so-called Western stressful world, we see the lion every 10 minutes. When the boss comes around, we see a lion. When the coworker asks something, we see a lion. Just the thought alone to go to that meeting or to that lunch break or whatever creates a stress response that is similar to the lion. And the bodies are not made for this kind of stress.
Mm-hmm.
But that's something we developed too, and we thought it's pretty cool, and we developed ideals that the very stressful, 24/7 reachable cell phone warrior is something we worship, and that's going to be the result out of it. And I can give a very concrete example from a client. That client had a fear of for his own existence in the future with financial issues, and I tried to talk to him, but he wanted to get rid of his fear, and then we did the work, and as I pointed out before, his mind came in the way. His mind was saying, no, I don't want to get rid of that feeling. I don't want to get rid of that fear. If I get rid of that fear, I'm going to slack, and then I'm going to have much more problems in the future. That was the logic of his mind. And of course, this kind of mind would resist the healing process, and so it didn't work. So in this case, sometimes it's more complicated. I just talked to him. I said, okay, so do you ever have made a decision that you regretted? He said, of course. I said, okay. Now go back to one of these decisions and think about it. Okay. Have you been very calm when you took that decision? He said, no. I remember that instance, I did this and this, and 2 weeks later I regretted it dearly. And I said, okay, and when you took that decision, how was your emotional state? And he said, no, I was like fearful, but I had to take the decision, and the time was up to decide, but I had to take it, but I didn't want to, and I noticed that my heart was racing, and said, okay. So when you took a decision, let's try to make a rule out of that. When you take a decision where you're not calm, peaceful, and emotionally light, the chances are it's not a good decision, and that you're going to regret it later on. You said, yeah, that's a rule I can apply to many of my experiences I had.
Mm-hmm.
Okay. Now think about what we're just doing now. We're trying to heal a trauma, the fear of financial of financial harm in the future, or fear for your existence, for your livelihood. And right now you just told me you want to keep that fear so you don't slack.
Mm-hmm.
And that fear makes your heart race, makes you fearful, and will lead you to bad decisions. And in that moment, his mind snapped. He said, oh, that's true. So I need to get rid of the fear to be calm and to make better decisions. He said, yeah. And then just took 2-3 more minutes, and then the trauma was healed. Okay, so the mind and all this logic we think and all the facts mostly get in the way of real life and trauma healing.
So, yeah, absolutely. So it seems like there's still, even though it's more targeted on the big difference between psychoanalysis and trauma therapy seems to be that, you're doing the work yourself. You are not relying on this therapist to this facilitator. I mean, no, I wouldn't say facilitator, but a therapist to tell you what it is that you're feeling. You're supposed to be with it and process it, so to speak. However, it does seem that there's still an important component to guiding people through these resistances, as you did in this example, to where these different parts of us, these different components of us are, again, our triune brains kind of inhibit us, as you guys say. So there's still an important component of facilitating this process whenever there's resistances or inhibitors, right?
Yes, completely. So that's my philosophy working with clients. I'm happy to take on new clients and show them the first steps. And that's not really complicated. And after 2, 3, 4 sessions, depending on the client, they feel comfortable with basic techniques. And then they will be able to think and analyze their basic problems on their own. And whenever they encounter a problem, and they will know the markers, which they can deal with them on their own, they're going to call me out. Or when they when they're dealing with a problem, they don't have a clue. These techniques don't work. So, for example, with that client I just explained about, he couldn't do that because his mind was getting in the way, so he couldn't really feel that trauma and heal it. And then it's good that you have somebody just trying to lead you through that part of the jungle and help you. But then I think it's best to do the work on your own and then get somebody eventually to ask for the way you're going. Okay? So it's like in real life, you're walking the world, and sometimes you know where to go, and sometimes you need to ask.
Mm-hmm.
And instead of relying 100% onto the therapist. Okay, so that's a huge difference in the way how I work. Of course, there's some clients that still need to build up and build some confidence, so they can do that on their own. That depends. Every client is a little bit different. But my wish, my aim, and my vision is that the client is able to deal with, like 50% roundabout of the issues on his own.
Yeah.
And then the rest can be done in sessions.
Yeah, that's great. That's a big paradigm shift. Huge. Well, before I ask anything else, I think this is the first time we're going to be saying this, but we're going to be resetting the room, as I've seen in other chats before. We have 2 people. It's great to have you guys. If you want to say hi, if you want to chat, I'm going to go ahead and ask for you guys to speak. You don't have to. If you just want to listen, feel free. If you want to ask anything about what we're talking about, feel free to. This is, again, just to chat about anything trauma related, anything academic, personal, whatever you guys want to talk about. So we just want to welcome you. And if you guys want to chat, feel free to.
Hi there. I just want to quickly introduce myself and say thank you to the speaker for talking about this very important topic. I've known Sergio. He's a friend of mine. I've known him for quite a while, and he is really passionate about this topic in particular. I think we've both shared kind of our experiences, and we've gone through a bit of tough times together, I would say. And it's such an important topic because just pain and suffering is just such a normal part of being human and living life. But I think that the way we deal with things, and especially when it comes to academic research, and if we're trying to make sense of psychology and trauma as a medical field, it's so important to consider all the different aspects of human physiology and human genetics and whatnot that play into our psychology. And so it's just fascinating to be here. It's fascinating to hear everybody's perspectives and obviously the voices and opinions of experts in the field. Thank you for inviting me, Sergio. I just wanted to say that the conversation is very interesting. So hopefully the more that I listen and the more that I learn from everybody here, I'll have more interesting questions or better things to say and contribute to the conversation. But I'm happy to be a part of it, and thank you so much for doing this.
No, thank you. And thanks for taking the time to be here to support and to speak about, personally about what you just said. I know you have a lot of experience in the science field. So, apart from any of that, dude, I'm just so happy that you took, time out of your life to join us and to chat and to listen. And yeah, this is something that I'm very passionate about. And more importantly, I'm grateful to contribute to a conversation with people who have spent a lot of time in their lives helping others. Because that's A, not easy, and B, so incredible. So yeah, just like you said, if you do at any point have any questions, if you want to chat about anything, feel free to jump in. And yeah, well, happy to have you.
Yes, thank you very much for being here, and I'm also very curious on your questions and what you think. There are already 6 talks up on YouTube, and that's why we record, so that not that we don't need necessarily everything here right now. So you can read and listen, and then we discuss what you heard, and if there are questions, we are very happy to answer them.
All right. Well, yeah, so I just go back really quick. I did find it, what I was talking about when we were talking about psychosomatic disorders. And it is Reich's concept of armoring, which is, that like we were talking about our sympathetic and just our nervous systems in general, there's always this ebb and flow that naturally happens, this natural expansion and contraction. And yeah, it's just that our bodies kind of create these tense spots, so to speak, whenever we hold some kind of emotional pain. And that's one of the ways that it shows up, right? So I wanted to ask you guys, because you are the ones with the experience. You are the ones who have helped a lot of clients. I thought it would be interesting to hear, without naming names, just personal experiences of how you see, whether it's in the world or whether it's with clients, with people that come to you for personal growth, for letting go of, anxiety, depression, or just behaviors. How do you see those things play out with people that you see in the world or that come to you for help? Are most people do most people come in just saying like, I have a lot of negative self-talk? Do you hear a lot of people come in with just I feel off in my body, like I don't feel comfortable in my body? Do you see people come in more with just feeling emotionally charged, or what are the ranges that you see people come in needing help with? Does that question kind of make sense?
Yeah, it does. And thank you for asking. And I think the spectrum is pretty large. So I just start with one story, which is a very nice story because it gave a very quick success. It's not an example that everything has to go this way, but it's a nice story. So I'm seeing a woman in her 30s, late 30s, and she heard that I do some trauma healing, and she has no concept of what that is and so on. But anyway, she was curious, and she said that there was something going on in her life, and she didn't really understand what. So it was very vague at the beginning. I didn't even. It wasn't like I'm afraid of this or that. It was very. Sometimes I feel just sad,
Mm-hmm.
and that was very vague. And then I tried to explain. I asked if there's like triggers, or at which moment, or if she's at home, at work, in the car. This. No. And so we just started to talk a little bit more, and then basically I asked her when was the last time that happened, and then she came and said, "Oh, it was the last time when I said goodbye to my kids. They went off to school and to college actually, and then I felt sad." Okay, and then I went back, and when was the time before that? And then again, it had to do with the kids leaving. And so basically, very quickly, within 7-8 minutes of talking to her, we discovered together that there was a pattern. She was not yet familiar with that pattern, that whenever somebody in her family would leave, she would have that sad reaction. The rest of her life was perfect. Okay?
Mm-hmm.
She had studied lots, had a good job, and was happy in her life. And so everything seemed perfect, but this was really getting on her nerves. And then I said, okay, and let's do the easy technique. Okay, let's do the easy technique with that, and just asked her 2 or 3 more questions to see what kind of trauma it was, and it was something where you can apply the easy technique, and she started doing the EFT tapping, and then just within minutes, really minutes, like 6-7 minutes, boom, it felt for her as a big stone was lifted off her chest, and she felt so much better. And she was like amazed. She said, "Wow, I didn't know that even this thing was even during normal days was pressuring me." So for her, the sadness was like very, very subconscious, was always there, and she just felt the peak of it when her kids were leaving, and just doing this 5, 6, 7 minutes of tapping just got rid of that heaviness, and she felt so much better. And I heard back from a friend of her 2 or 3 weeks later, and she said she's still amazed, and her life has changed so much. And it was a very, very quick. I think it was the quickest session that I had with a client, and was so successful, and it was amazing. Okay, but this person already had done some meditations. That person was aware of things, but she wasn't aware of that particular problem. She was aware of other things and organized her life in a way that she was happy. Okay, so she was not in that victim mode where everything is just bad and I can't change anything. She was very active, but there was just this one thing what was standing in her way to her feeling even more happy and more complete in her life.
Gotcha.
And I like that story, and but there are other stories as well. So perhaps Inga likes to share another one.
Oh, you want to do the fastest sessions competition? Yeah. No, actually, it is quite amazing that if you get the right handle, sometimes it's really just, knowing that little twist, and then you're able to resolve the whole thing. I think the quickest and shortest session I ever had was a young woman who had lost her grandmother. She was grieving, and I just said, well, do you know, the grieving process is seen as something normal, but it doesn't have to be painful like that. So I said, okay, we can try. And essentially it was just really knowing what to focus on and doing a bit of tapping. And that was pretty much it. Of course, you have to have a bit of knowledge of the background of the psychological map, but 15 minutes.
Wow.
And after that, she was grateful for the time that she was allowed to have with her grandmother. And she remembered the happy times with her, and the pain was gone.
Wow.
Yeah, and I think typically people say that the grieving time, if you lose someone, is at least a year.
Mm-hmm. So, yeah, it's pretty. That's something that I've actually thought about asking. This idea of grief, because grief seems like a process, an emotional process. Not so much a traumatic event, or I guess you could say it's like an emotional disturbance, but we talk about it like it has to happen. So you're saying that it's much longer than it needs to be. So it shouldn't have to be that long?
Yeah, let me put forward a bit of a revolutionary idea. It's not necessary to feel bad. Sadness and grief and anger and fear and what have you, they are really just byproducts of problems that happened in development. And you can access that fairly quickly in most cases. Now, of course, a lot of people have multiple problems, and then to dig out where exactly the little button is that unravels everything, that is a bit more complicated.
Mm-hmm.
But basically, it's not necessary to suffer. It's not.
Yeah, that is a revolutionary idea.
Yeah.
Yeah, because it seems like. Go ahead.
Sorry, when I presented that idea to an HR manager, okay, because that HR manager had the problem that in his company many employees were many times in conflict with each other.
Uh-huh.
And he was suffering from that, and of course the company was suffering and lack of productivity. And I explained that concept to him, that he would need to have that suffering feeling, because he was always like, oh, I'm the HR manager, I have to fix that, otherwise my boss and the CEO and so on. And his words were, it's too good to be true. But he didn't have the balls to try it out. Okay, and that's what the resistance we started the session with, and so yeah. But as Inka said, suffering is something we can work on.
I love that definition. What do you call it? Resistance is insufficient amount of balls.
Yeah, it's true. It makes sense, because what you guys are describing is, I think it's so natural to be skeptical. And in fact, I do think it's, and maybe you guys disagree, but I think it's important. I think it's important to discern what's, a hoax, what's not. I think those mechanisms in our brains are important. But ultimately, what you guys are establishing has so many, is more of an opportunity than anything. Like you guys are saying, even if you're wrong, even if what you're saying is not true, like, there's only so much you're actually sacrificing. And in this case, it's really just time and maybe looking like a fool. That's about it. If doing tapping exercises or outside of what you guys are doing, but if it's just looking left and right or using binaural headphones or beats or doing somatic experiencing or any of the power therapies that exist right now, even if you're skeptical that they don't work, maybe you lose a little money and maybe you lose a little time, but that's about it. I know not to everybody. I know money's not like easily available for everyone, especially with therapy, because it is kind of expensive. So there's that issue. But yeah, I think you're right. And those are great. Those are great stories. I do find it hard to think that some emotions are just not necessary. When you're saying not necessary, do you mean altogether they shouldn't exist, or because I have an issue with the idea that being angry or being sad aren't important. Maybe sad I can understand if you can just kind of I think you should have them to an extent. You should feel sadness to an extent, just maybe not forever. Or like you're saying, the grief process shouldn't be a whole year. But the idea of being angry, for example, I see it as a survival mechanism, as a defensive mechanism against danger, somebody else attacking you, something else attacking you. So maybe we're talking about something slightly different, but I'm wondering if you agree or disagree with that as well. If y'all do, either one.
I think I already put my like I burned my mouth is what we say here in Germany. Like it's true. Yeah. At most, emotions just run through your system. Like okay, that's it. But they don't need to be stuck, and they don't need to be suffering.
Okay.
Yeah, I think it's very important.
As a need to defense is, I'm always trying to describe to my clients that a brain that is unencumbered by emotional reactions and unlimited by the kind of physiological changes that come with the fight or flight reactions is generally much better able to handle pretty much any situation.
Yeah, that makes sense.
Let's just add there. I mean, emotions are always there, okay? In the way of depending on how you define emotions, okay? So the body has a language of communication. The head has language of communication as thought, and from my perspective, emotions are a way of how the body communicates. But what most people define as emotions is that what causes suffering. That is the stuck emotion. So it's not something that comes and goes, as Inka said, it flows basically, but it comes and it stays, and you're afraid, you're trying to run away, you're trying to eat ice cream to avoid it, or you're trying to drink alcohol to not feel it, or something like this. This is what most people call an emotion, and this usually is trauma. This is not the pure emotion the body needs to function. That's a level underneath. You can't hardly feel that way because the already activated emotions in most people are so strong that you can't even go to this more subtle level of how the body actually communicates with you. Okay?
Yeah.
And so it's a little bit of definition, but usually what is loud, okay, and which is stays as a feeling, sensation, as an emotion, that is something caused by trauma. And if it's just temporary, flowing in and flowing out, that's something which is natural. And that could be that the body communicates with you and says, no, don't go this way, I have a bad feeling about that. And if it goes away, it might be an emotional compass. I don't know if that's the thing or not, or there might be other people who interpret that as a holy guidance or whatever. I don't know. I don't want to get into that discussion. Because most people are not at that level. Most people are at the level where they see something, they get an emotion and start to cry, or start to run away, or start to try to avoid that emotion, and that is trauma, and that can be healed. And that usually causes suffering. The other emotions that come and go, they don't cause suffering.
So crying would be, are you saying that when somebody's crying because of an emotion, it's still stuck? Because it's suffering, it's overwhelming?
Yeah. Crying is basically, how you call that, an overflow valve. Yeah, so you try to get rid of stuck emotion, stuck energy.
Okay. Interesting. See, that's what I meant when we talked about catharsis a couple of weeks ago. That crying or punching something is like not actually healing, but maybe like a way to dampen the nervous system as it is overwhelmed by a certain emotion. So that kind of
it might help just in the moment.
Yeah.
But for example, this loving yourself meditation, which I have, or exercise, which I have on YouTube,
Yeah.
is from my point of view a bigger value than crying or to punch something, because you associate a relaxed state with an image in that meditation, and you just need to think about that image, and the body immediately relaxes because the body learned that this is close together, and then you can think clearer and can experience that situation that you're in from a different angle without suffering or with less suffering.
Gotcha. Is this idea of loving yourself important to healing as well, or is it just a technique to kind of calm down your system? I've seen it before, I've seen it in other aspects. I've seen it. I've been reading Leonard Lascaux's healed. I forgot. Healing with Love, I think. And it's this idea that love, the actual feeling of love, serves as like a catalyst, maybe, to accessing these emotional wounds. I wouldn't say all of them. But it makes me think about that. Whether it's from a psychological standpoint or a biological standpoint, or from a solely trauma theory perspective. Have you guys seen that love is a very important catalyst to healing?
Well, I can tell you the opposite. When you are resistance and when you say, I don't accept that and I don't love myself and everything is filled with hate, it really works. So that's why this exercise is so important. When you do that while you do the tapping, everything works much, much smoother. And I don't know, Inka, what's your perspective of love being the ultimate healing frequency of healing emotion?
I still think it needs to be combined by really feeling, sensing what's going on in your body.
Mm-hmm.
But it definitely makes it a lot easier to access that, and it makes it a lot faster to actually heal it. Yeah.
Okay. So it helps a bit. Interesting.
Oh, it helps a lot, yeah.
Huh.
It helps a lot, but doing it as a remote technique, so to speak, is probably not very effective.
What do you mean remote?
Not being in body and then trying to do loving yourself. That's probably not
Gotcha.
Working very well.
That's something I wanted to ask you about, actually. We've touched on this subject maybe twice. I'm pretty sure twice of not feeling in body. I don't know if that's something you guys can speak to. I know you have a lot of experience with that, Inka, and you've been, kind enough to share that personal experience that you didn't know at a point in your life when you were kind of working through personal growth and emotional, just a lot of emotional things, that you didn't know you weren't in body and how important that was. I know talking about these topics, these sensory kind of kinesthetic aspects of perception aren't necessarily the easiest thing to do. Talking about emotions and finding the right words and explaining your inner world is kind of hard sometimes. I would say like 90% of the time, at least personally speaking. So do you think you could talk a bit more about that to maybe somebody who might listen to this and be like, oh crap, I'm not usually in my body. I didn't even know that. I thought this is how it's supposed to feel. Do you think you could talk a bit more about what it is to feel like you're in body and maybe what it feels like to not be in body?
Okay, let me try. So first of all, the place where I was coming from was really that the idea of being out of body, I just thought that's woo-woo stuff. Yeah, that's kind of like, yeah, kind of just disregard it. Where else would I be if not in my body?
Right.
Just the sheer concept wasn't something that registered for me. Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So that made me successfully more or less manage to do all rebirthing training in being more or less out of body.
Mm-hmm.
And the way that I could describe it to you, like if you're out of body, you're actually having a sense of being beside yourself. I mean, it's not for nothing that our language actually has some terms for these conditions, yeah?
Yeah.
If you're being beside yourself, you're literally shifting your viewpoint from your biological eyes, which is what would be normal, right, to slightly being displaced, and sometimes it can go all the way to really seeing yourself from a distance, yeah?
Yeah.
So that would be an indication that you're out of body. And
Okay.
when you're out of body, it lessens the ability to feel what's really going on in your body. And absurdly, at the same time, keeps the negative feelings stuck.
Okay.
Okay, so you want to go in body, and that involves feeling as much as you can what's going on there. And you can start by putting your hands on your skin somewhere and just putting your awareness there. And, oh, okay, so if I was there in my awareness, how would I sense the way my hand is touching the skin? For most people, that works pretty well. For example, if you put the hand on the chest, and then you put your awareness focus under your hand, that would bring you automatically inside the body.
Oh, okay. That's a great way of putting it. So it's almost like this, and maybe this is not wholly encompassing, it's not saying everything you just said, but a part of being inside of your body is being very connected to how it feels inside in terms of sensations or emotions, right? I've never, the idea of being so detached from your body that you see it from the outside or you see it from a distance, that's always been very hard for me to understand, because I've read about it quite a lot. I've had my share of feeling distance from my body or numb or disconnected from my feelings, that they feel stuck, as you say, because it's a lot easier to just kind of feel them as if you're looking at them with your peripheral vision, so to speak. Than it is to be with them, focusing on them. So I feel like that's something at least I personally can go back and forth a little bit. But this idea of, and Daniel and I did this right before we started talking. I actually did put my hand on my chest, and it was very helpful to kind of focus on what was going on there and what was going on below it and stuff like that. So that's a really good way of putting it, that I feel like it's easy for people to actually feel and understand if they can just put their hand on their chest. As soon as you said that, I felt like it made so much more sense to me. But I still don't, it must be pretty lousy for people to feel like they're looking at themselves being very detached. I've always taken that like very literally, like as if people, almost like a spirit, and you're flying outside of your body, and then you're actually seeing your whole body. And I wonder if that's how people actually feel, because that's the way it makes it. People, like, things I read make it sound sometimes, but I feel like that sounds so literal. Do you guys know what I'm talking about?
No, but it's actually like that. Very few people experience that in the present, but if you look at past memories, memories of traumatic moments, work for most people as if they took an image of themselves in that, like a photo in that situation. So their memory is from, like, they have a picture of themselves standing in that situation. So how can that be that they have stored a memory that was from a different viewpoint than actually from behind their eyes in that moment?
Yeah.
That's because they were out of body.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense.
Yeah. So, and most people have memories like that. I don't know if you had a chance to check that for yourself, but in most cases, that's how traumatic memories are stored.
Yeah, that makes sense. I mean, personally speaking, I feel that a lot of the things I feel aren't necessarily memories. Like if I were to work on something that I feel, I have difficulties seeing it as a very specific early memory. I feel like the way my body at this point in time communicates with me is through a lot of sensations and more now through emotions. But this idea for me personally of going and seeing like, oh, I feel this way because 10 years ago this happened to me. I feel like my mind doesn't communicate with me that way. And in fact, trying to go earlier and seeing like when I felt like that before, like if I feel this way right now and then going back and maybe finding something that happened 8 or 10 or 20 years ago, it's not something that comes very natural to me. In fact, it feels very challenging. So, but I do understand the concept though. I do understand the idea.
You don't want to go and look for a causal explanation before you actually went and stayed with the feelings.
Oh, okay.
That would be something that wouldn't get you anywhere in most cases. Yeah.
Yeah.
That thinking what would be the reason for what I'm experiencing now, that doesn't get you anywhere. Experience the now.
Yeah.
Then allow yourself to go to the place where it started.
Oh, gotcha.
Happens.
I think that might be my many years of doing psychotherapy, right? Because psychotherapy is focused very much on this rational side. I mean, there is a lot of emotional component, but ultimately, I think that one of the main things that psychotherapy, at least psychoanalytic therapy, that I am well versed in as somebody who did therapy, is the idea that why did this happen, or why are people that hurt you this way? Because having a sort of rational aspect to it gives you some sort of control, and it may not be emotional resolution, but there is, I mean, to an extent, to where we are, at least for most of us, there is some sort of I can't think of the right word, but it is very helpful to know that you have some control over the understanding of how you feel a certain way. So, but
that need for control in itself may be the problem. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely, absolutely. I don't disagree with you on that at all. And I think that's why I'm so analytical, and I try not to be, and I think I've gotten better at it. And doing this kind of work has helped a lot. But yeah, I think it's one of those things that is very different, and I'm very happy to be talking to people who are, helping progress this paradigm and this new perspective and this, personal human growth for a lot of people. So, I actually think this would be a good place to end it, and I feel like we discussed a lot. We had some people join us, which was great. And I feel like we talked about important things but we did it in a way that was pretty good. It was a good way to understand it. You guys gave great examples, and I don't know. For me, I feel like I don't have any questions. I don't want to oversaturate people who listen to this, and I don't want to oversaturate you guys. So is there anything else that you guys want to add before we go?
Sergio, thank you very much. That was awesome guidance through our 1.5 hours again, and awesome questions. And I also agree that this is a good point to stop now and talk next week in Trauma Talks number 8.
Yeah. Yeah. Inka, anything else you might want to add?
Well, there's always lots to discuss, but I think, like Daniel said, we have another trauma talk coming up, so let's do it then.
Fantastic. Well,
thanks very much for having us.
Of course. Thank you, guys. Thanks for everybody listening. Thanks for the people who showed up. And we'll talk to you next time. Guys, be safe and have a great night.
Okay.
Bye, Inka.
Bye. Good night.
Bye, Daniel.
Bye.
Be safe.